As I said earlier on, for those of you who were there when we did intros, my name is Matt Locke. I'm commissioning editor for education at Channel 4. And we're about 3/4 of the way through the first year of a really significant shift in the way that we do education. Channel 4 has a budget of around $6 million a year, which is ring-fenced for education. Years ago, it used to be schools programming, and it used to go out in the morning slots. About 5 or 6 years ago, when Heather Rabatz was head of education, the focus shifted to focusing on 14 to 19-year-olds and focusing on informal learning, so very much life skills, kind of what I would call sex and drugs and growing up, rather than maths and science and physics. And they made a bunch of really, really excellent award-winning features, documentaries, dealing with issues that teens face in those very transitional and transformative period in their life. Janie Walker, the current head of education, took over about a year or so ago. And she looked at the slots that we had for those programs, which were still the old school slots, so 9:30 to midday in the morning, during the week, during term time, and came to the not too surprising conclusion that they were probably the worst slots we could pick to try and reach that audience directly. The focus of Channel 4 Education was never really to sell their content through schools, but to try and reach teens directly. So she made a decision which I think is significant, not just from the point of education, but actually from the whole point of what broadcasters are doing with their content as audiences shift. And she decided that from January 2008, the entire $6 million budget would go on to making cross-platform projects. So we would still make television, but we would only make it as part of cross-platform projects. And so I was brought in from a previous job at the BBC, and I brought with me a fellow commissioning editor, Alice Taylor, who specialises in games. And what we're really doing over the next couple of years is experimenting. I've been involved in new media and in particular in broadcasting over the last kind of 6 or 7 years. And we're all dealing with the same problem, which is that the attention of our audiences have shifted, and it's become much harder to reach certain demographics with messages that we want to reach, the kind of classic messages of public sector broadcasting. Anyone involved in broadcasting is aware that Ofcom are going through a series of public service reviews, looking at how broadcasting changes with that. And the work that we're doing is very much at the cutting edge, because as audiences are diversifying their attention across TV channels, across the web, across mobile, across games platforms, some of the traditional PSB content is falling off the cliff of attention. And at Channel 4, education was really one of the first genres to suffer. So what we're trying to do is go out and find our audience where they are. So what I'm going to talk a bit about today is some initial ideas about how we've approached that, and then I'm going to talk through a couple of projects that we're doing that are live right now, and then I'm going to give you some early learnings that we've got. I'm not suggesting I'm an expert on this stuff at all, but we've been running some really interesting projects, and hopefully we can give you some ideas. As I said, we're not focused specifically on learning in the classrooms, but I think some of the core challenges we're facing, how to get attention, how to keep it, and also how to turn that attention into some kind of valuable action or output, is as applicable to the work that some of the people here are doing in schools as it is to broadcasters. So first of all, when I went out and asked indies to pitch at us, I wanted them to think quite carefully about the platforms and the technologies that we were asking them to use. I'm a geek. I've been interested in technology for donkey's years, been involved in cross-platform content in a variety of roles for about 10, 12 years now. But I really don't think it's about technology. I really think it's about the warm bodies. It's essentially about the people using the technology. And I'm more interested in what kind of space people think they're in when they're using these platforms, rather than the technology platforms themselves. This has been touched on a bit this morning, the idea of who has permission to go into these spaces when they become more intimate, like mobile phones, or where is it appropriate for teachers to use social media channels to communicate with their students. So as part of a briefing for our indies, I kind of tried to define what I think the 6 social spaces are that we use both online and offline, and to try and describe some of their characteristics. So some of you might have seen this already if you've seen me talk, so apologies for going through it again. Also, some of you have seen Ewan McIntosh, a colleague at Channel 4 talk. He's been borrowing them from me and giving me credit, so you might have seen them as well. But I'll just go through them quickly. So I think there are roughly 6 spaces that each have their own behaviors and expectations. They each have their own technology challenges, but I'm more interested in what you might call the ergonomic or the psychological challenges. Where do people think they are in their head? What kind of characteristics of spaces are these? And what challenges does that provide if you're trying to create content for them? So first of all, there are secret spaces. In the late 90s, I was working up in Yorkshire and did quite a lot of projects with mobile phones, and they have very, very specific characteristics to them. They are a very, very intimate form of technology that almost becomes part of the user's sense of their own personal space. And they're very, very hard to come in and enter to unless you're part of a very, very tight social network. So people use mobile phones generally to communicate with a very small group of people. Their address book, their contacts lists. The conversations tend to be very one-to-one over SMS, increasingly as a mobile web picks up over IM and things like that. People tend to use a lot of vernacular. They use lots of kind of slang. They're used for constant, what you might call, if you do transactional analysis, stroking behavior. Lots of kind of small messages that reaffirm social links rather than kind of much larger browsing. So the mobile phone is an incredibly powerful space to use to communicate, but an incredibly difficult one to get into if you're not part of somebody's sense of their social network and their friends. Then we have group spaces, and this is really where there's been a huge amount of innovation in the last couple of years. Lots and lots of tools online that let you get together with a bunch of people who you share something in common with. So group spaces like the social networks like Bebo, MySpace, Tagged, etc., allow you to define your social group according to rules that you set. So the people that you're at work with, the people who like the same band as you, the people that like the same TV show as you, the people you're at school with, whatever. These can often be much, much bigger groups than you would expect to see offline. But we've found for research for teens that they're very discerning in understanding the kind of more nuanced notions of friends in these networks than the pure technology platform allows. We did a fantastic piece of research with a girl showing the different categories in the folders of her MSN network that she had for friends, and she had, real friends, wannabe friends, friends that she wanted to be friends with, kind of people she hates, people she kind of loves, people she fancies, and she kind of moved her friends radically as we were watching her through all of these different groups. So even within the relatively binary networks that some of these social technologies set up for who's your friend and who's not, kids are kind of hacking them and creating quite subtle and nuanced expressions of their social networks and their identities. Then we have publishing spaces, which sometimes seem very similar to the group spaces, and often actually the same tools exist on the same platform. But publishing spaces are very different in that what they do is they enable you to create a voice for yourself and for your output and your identity in a space where it's assumed that some of the audience that you're publishing to will be unknown to you. So if you post a picture on Flickr, unless you set the privacy on it to only family and friends, you know that anyone can see it. If you post on your MySpace page or your blog and you have that set to public, if you run a blog off WordPress, depending on how you set your privacy, you can expect to publish something and get feedback from people you don't know. Now, this can be incredibly valuable. You can get feedback from people who might have found your content, who are experts in it, who can give you advice, but also potentially quite a threat because you can get people who maybe aren't so desirable following you as well. But the difference is when the technology informs you properly, there is something quite powerful and radical about being able to publish your opinion online in a way in which you can completely control. And then there are performing spaces, spaces in which there is a rule set that defines a goal and a way in which a group is going to reach that goal. So this is predominantly within game spaces, but you're starting to see performing spaces and rules-based structures appearing in other social networks via kind of like mini-games and applications and things like that. But what's important about performing spaces is they're really an opportunity to show off. They're an opportunity to perform and to exceed the rules of the game. And there is a tension between, as there is in something like football, the rules of the game and the extent to which your talent can enable you to perform that in a fantastic and beautiful way. So just as a really brilliant centre forward will casually backheel a goal into the net, you see people playing games in extravagant ways. There are videos online from teens playing games really fast or sharing cheats or hacks. So what's interesting about performing spaces is the fact that there is a defined rule set that creates expectations of behavior and performance, and that actually testing that rule set and sometimes trying to find shortcuts around it is part of the narrative of that experience as well. There are also more traditional participation spaces where the group has a goal, but is a much more flexible world in which you can develop that. So, for example, you know, marches, meetings, markets. There are quite a lot of really interesting spaces online, like Etsy, which is a kind of eBay for people who make craft goods. For Threadless, which is a community where people design T-shirts and the whole community votes on the T-shirts and the most popular T-shirt designs gets put into production. We're seeing quite sophisticated participation spaces that are actually guiding community effort into achieving quite concrete outcomes. So again, a very different set of behaviors and expectations. And then finally, we still have watching spaces. We still have spaces where you feel like you're part of a crowd, and part of the experience is to actually feel like you're part of a large group of people sharing a synchronous or maybe asynchronous event. So you're all at the gig, you're all watching the TV program, you're all in the cinema, whatever. So when I ask people to design projects for me that use social software, I like them to think about this rather than about the technology. I don't want to know that something's on YouTube or is on the mobile or is using Facebook. I want to know what kind of space are you trying to create? How will you communicate to your users what's expected of their behavior? And how will you create rule sets that allow the group to articulate any transgressions of that behavior? Because we all kind of feel this quite intangibly when we're using that. If you've ever got an inappropriate friend request or somebody who's kind of stepped over the line in a social network, you kind of feel it almost physically, but sometimes the software doesn't really help you express that. So that's rather esoteric and theoretical. What I'm going to do now is show you a couple of projects that we're doing right now at Channel 4. The resolution on this screen is really quite low, so you won't be able to show the whole site. The first one I'm going to show you, we had a number of themes for our commissions at Channel 4 this year, one of which was campaigning. And we had a lot of pitches from people saying Channel 4 should run a campaign for teens about X or Y, normally about the environment, because obviously those issues are very hot right now. But then I got a pitch which, for me, summed up where I wanted our projects to be going, which was rather than saying, here's an issue, we're going to communicate this issue to you as teens using MySpace or whatever. The pitch I had was, why don't we see what teens are passionate about? Why don't we ask them what they're campaigning about? So Battlefront is a project with Raw Television, who are a kind of very traditional TV indie making documentaries, and Locke, who are a digital production company. And Battlefront essentially is following 19 teens that we cast. We went out and found. We found 19 people who are very passionate and at various levels of running campaigns themselves. And then we've just finished a competition online on Bebo for a 20th campaigner. So we've got 20 people who are between the ages of 16 and 21 who are trying to make a change in their lives. And what we're doing over the next 9 months is we're following them online. We have video TV production companies making films about them. They're making films themselves using flip cameras, which are these really lovely 99 quid hard drive based video cameras that are really simple to use. And also on Bebo, we're doing this in partnership with Bebo. And so they're running their own blog. So the project really exists in 3 of those spaces. It exists in a very kind of personal group space. All of the teens have their own profiles on Bebo. They're completely in control of that. They can do whatever they want on that, and teens can contact them and be part of their campaign. Actually, here's an example of Rachel Fripps, who's running a anti-size zero campaign. She's already very active online. She runs a magazine that's kind of anti-size zero. So this is her Battlefront page on Bebo with an ad from T-Mobile. That's a nice tie-in. And all of her friends and comments, people kind of talking about her campaign and what she's doing are all here. So you can dive in here and actually become part of her campaign. We also have our own space on Bebo. So this is a Battlefront space on Bebo for the whole project. So this is like an aggregate site that's aggregating all of the different campaigners and what they're doing. And then we have the main site, which shows video, gives you information about it. We're also building a campaigner's handbook here. It gives you links to all of our profiles and other spaces. We're also, at the end of the project, going to have this big campaigners handbook that will have lots of advice for teens wanting to run their own campaign. I'm just going to show you quickly this video, if the sound's working, to give you an idea about how the project's working.
I'm campaigning against size zero models using my online fashion magazine, Inside Out. Models shouldn't be subjected to different weight values than everyone else. I want Inside Out magazine to be a mix, to be a balance. I'm using scene models because they're different, because they're not size zero. The scene is a culture for people who want to be different, people who want to stand out, and people who don't care what anyone else thinks about them. It's about being yourself. The idea needs to be shown out that unless you are clinically obese and unhealthy, you should be happy with how you are. If I can change hundreds of minds in the process, I will have achieved my goal.
One of the other reasons we're doing Battlefront Online is that I think the web does two things really well. The first thing it does is it connects people that have information with people who need it. The second thing it does is it leaves a trace of that connection so that other people can find it and learn from it. So a key part of Battlefront is a relationship between the 19 campaigners and a growing group of mentors that we've got, people who have volunteered their time from different industries. So we have everyone from, professional campaigners to advertising gurus. If I scroll down, we've got people like Sir Michael Norton, who many of you will know, who's done many brilliant things in campaigning in his time. Wes Streeting from the NUS, who started the Student Loans campaign on Facebook. John Bird, the founder of The Big Issue. Alfie Denham from Moblog. Bibi van der Zee, who's just published a book, Rebels Handbook Guide. So what we're doing is we're basically trying to connect people who have this experience and have this knowledge with the teens who are trying to build their campaigns, and then leaving that knowledge on the site for other teens to find. So what we're trying to do is use these brilliant advantages of the web to actually create a resource that lots of teens can learn from. A similar project we're doing with a slightly different focus is Year Dot. With Year Dot, we were very interested in telling the story of that transitional period between 14 to 19. What's remarkable when you speak to the kids in this age group is just how much their lives are kind of taken apart and rebuilt again. Sometime between 14 to 19, all the scaffolding, all the support, all the institutions that have supported you to where you are right now, your family, your school, all those other institutions, kind of fall away, and you have to rebuild those networks yourselves. And for most of us who lived before the web, you'd be reliant on personal connections. Somebody who knew somebody in a career that you were interested in, or a good teacher at school that said you have this talent, you might be able to do that. We were very interested in how teens are using the web to make these connections and to get answers to the questions they have in their life. So we've got 15 teens here on Year Dot. It has a similar structure to Battlefront. We have a partnership with MySpace, so each of these teams have their own space on MySpace. This is the aggregate Year Dot site, which shows a whole range of videos and comments from the teens, some of which are shot by our production companies, some of which are shot themselves. And then we're also making 30 half-hour TV documentaries. The first series of 10 has just gone out in the last couple of weeks. The next series of 10 is in February, and then a final series at the end of the project in summer. And what we're doing is just really getting teens to talk about the choices they're making and to talk about the kind of things that they're facing in their lives and how they are getting the answers to their problems. So it ranges from Jilly here, who's 17. She left home last year because she's in Arsenal's under-19s ladies football team, and she's also in the England under-19, so she's left to join the Arsenal Academy, and she's coming to terms with what it means to leave friends behind, to have a talent as a focus of her career, and to trying to build a life around that. We've got people like Josh, who's 19. He was at a school, he's just passed his A-levels and is starting at St Andrews in Edinburgh. He has Asperger's syndrome, and he's just been in a college which specifically supported children with Asperger's, and his goal was to really go out and be a normal student and to actually come off Prozac and start living his life. So that's what he's doing. Aaron here is trying to set up a dance school in South London to teach other kids free dance, how to kind of be positive and stay off the streets. And he's also part of a dance group that are getting winning competitions and are going to a world championships in New York. He's balancing running his own business with actually being part of that group. And then there's people like Tom Marcel over here, who is running a website called Not Going to Uni, which is basically providing information for teens who don't want to go to university, because he found that when his girlfriend said she didn't want to go to university, the only thing the careers teacher gave her was 2 leaflets saying this is why you should go to university. So he felt that there's this real missing opportunity to support kids in doing that. And what's interesting is we're not, this isn't a reality show, we're not asking them to do things. What we're doing is getting them to talk about these issues and getting them to find ways of expressing the challenges they're facing in their lives using these social networks. So they're making videos, they're blogging on MySpace, so here's our space on MySpace. The teens have their own pages on their own sites. And what's really interesting is starting to see how the teens are connecting and how people are actually sharing information. So Josh, for example, posted really quite a moving video describing his experiences of coming off Prozac. And then the next day on his MySpace blog was getting lots of really, really good and supportive comments from other teens and older people who'd had similar experiences, sharing their experiences online. What we're also doing is trying to kind of fold the communities that are surrounding these projects online into the story. So we had a competition for people to tell their own year dot story, and we're now following Sam Eads, who's one of the winner, online, and actually included his video in the TV program. So we're trying to get teens to tell their own stories again as part of this. So what I'm quickly going to do is basically try and say a little bit about what we think we've learned from these projects. We really were starting out from a position of weakness in terms of where broadcasters normally are. As broadcasters, there are a number of things, number of assets you have to try and get attention. You can either have an incredible amount of talent working on your project, or you can have a brilliant slot in the evening schedules. You can have a huge amount of marketing. There are a number of things you can do to get attention. And a lot of the projects we're doing right now are really, really trying to find what the new tactics for these free perennial problems are. How do you get attention? How do you keep attention, and how do you turn it into action? Because as I mentioned earlier on, the dirty secret of Web 2.0 technologies is it's never been easier to publish. It's never been easier to get your content up on the web, but it's also never been easier to be ignored. And one of the most challenging things, whether you're trying to get the attention of a group of school kids or whether you're trying to get the attention of a bunch of teachers on MySpace, is how do you compete with the sheer quantity of content that's out there in front of them now? How can you do anything that cuts through? So as I said, I'm not saying that we're experts at this, and we're in a fortunate position of having enough money to try some quite big experiments and find out, but we're starting to learn a few things. So in terms of getting attention, the number one thing is just to distribute everywhere. We seed and share our content across dozens of sites across the web. And in actual fact, for some of the videos on Year Dot and Battlefront, we're getting sometimes 2/3 of the audience initially finding our video outside of our site. So they're finding it on other video sharing sites, they're finding it on other blogs, they're finding it wherever their attention already is. The other thing is that building an audience takes a huge time. So most of the biggest mistakes that people made when pitching me projects last year is they described the project and then started by saying the user goes to the website and they have this brilliant experience. And they don't actually understand how you go from grabbing someone's attention to taking them to your project. All the pitches I heard last year were a bit like that user scenario from T-Mobile, where the user picks up the mobile phone and everything magically happens around them. And I'm afraid that's a bit of a complete myth. Getting your users' attention and getting them to come and engage with the projects is phenomenally hard. And we're starting at least 6 weeks before we kind of really launch the projects, just starting to seed content out there to get people to kind of start engaging. With Year Dot, we started a competition on the MySpace page saying, you know, tell us about your Year Dot. Tell us about your own year that changed your life, that first year, the rest of your life. And we got an incredible conversation going on that started people talking about the project before we brought the teens in and actually started the project properly. Go to where your audience is. I've kind of talked about that a bit, but you know, just sticking something up online and assuming that everyone's going to come. I always kind of say it's a bit like that Field of Dreams film, you know, build it and they will come. That's a complete fallacy online. Even brands like Channel 4, we're still out there fighting to get attention with this audience, and it's really, really hard to do that. So we've done partnerships with places like Spinebreakers, which is Penguin Books, Teen Social Network for Teen Social Network about books. We've done projects with Red Bull Music Academy, with Monkey Slum, with lots of sites that are there where we know teens' attention is. Obviously at Channel 4, we've got some advantage in that we've got projects like Hollyoaks, Skins and Phonejacker, and so we're working with those communities to get them to come to the projects as well. But you really just have to find out where the attention is and go there instead. And you can use competitions and virals to do that, but they need to be relevant. So, for example, we did on another project a small kind of casual game that we'd seeded on lots of different sites. And we got huge amounts of traffic coming to the site, but because the whole rest of the project wasn't about games, they all just disappeared again. So you can do these little competitions and virals to initially get attention, but it doesn't work in the long time. Oh, and the other thing is games are just phenomenal. Nielsen produced some research recently on the top 10 websites for teens at different age groups. Between under 12, the top 10 websites were pretty much dominated by the children's TV channel. So it was Nick Jr., CBeebies, stuff like that. Between 12 and 17, it was dominated by casual game sites, free games online, Miniclip, Congregate, stuff like that. 17 and above, it was split almost half and half between video sharing sites and student information sites. So it was student loans or UCAS, or it was YouTube, Reva, Dailymotion, places like that. But games are just phenomenally great to get attention. In terms of keeping it, what we're doing a lot with these sites is we're tweaking and redesigning them throughout the project. The great thing about doing these projects online over such a long period of time, Battlefront is a 9-month project, Year Dot is a 12-month project, is we're constantly looking at the data, what people are doing in the sites, and constantly tweaking them and rebuilding them. And initially, on a couple of our projects, we just tried to be a bit too clever. We tried to make the sites a little too tricksy. The routes through to the video content was sometimes a little too obscure. So we're just making it a lot simpler now, just putting all the video up front, making it really easy for people to find the content they want. The other thing we're doing is constantly repackaging the content, because you've got people coming to the project throughout the whole year. You know, your audience isn't built on day one. It's gradually building up over the whole project. So you've got to constantly rebuild the content as catch-ups, constantly find ways of helping the people that are just coming to the project feel like they're part of a community and that they haven't missed the boat. And this is something that a lot of particularly cross-platform games projects get wrong. They start these really, really fabulous kind of narrative games experiences, but if you don't follow it from week 1, by week 4 you've lost it. So part of the challenge is how you always lower the barrier to entry for people just coming to the project. And then thirdly, make it really easy for them to subscribe and sign up. And this doesn't mean getting loads of personal data, it just means making it very, very simple for them to get a regular feed about the project, because teens' social lives online are incredibly fragmented. They don't do the kind of hard bookmarking that older users of the web do. They don't tend to have, you know, kind of like very, very curated spaces that they go through. They tend to follow or to Google. That's how they navigate the web. They either follow links from friends' blogs or kind of from spaces they find online, or they Google stuff. They don't really remember it. They don't bookmark it. Unless you can get them to friend you on a social network or get an email address, it's very hard to keep their attention and to get them to come back to the project. Bring the most popular stories to the top. We're kind of finding the people who are really, really doing well on Battlefront and Year Dot and making them a bigger part of the story, because we know they're the people that are very good. It's not so much that they're engaging or that they're the kind of stars. It's more the people who are being really popular are the teams who are actively using the opportunity to build networks and communities. Some of the teams in the project at the moment are seeing it more like a mirror. They're enjoying seeing themselves represented online. Other ones are seeing it like a window, and they're using it as an opportunity to reach out and make networks and connect with people and build the social networks that will help them achieve their goals. And so what we're really doing is trying to encourage that type of activity, to get people to really make connections with other people and find people who can help them solve their problems. And making games. I mean, you know, games are brilliant in not only getting attention, but keeping it. We did a 5-episode game earlier on this year, and the amount of people that followed all 5 episodes across the whole project was around 90%, which is just phenomenal online. And then finally, how do you turn all of this attention into something tangible and valuable, into some kind of impact, some kind of payload that actually helps people change their lives and actually helps them make sense of their lives? In terms of participation, the sad truth is you just can't make it too easy. We've tried a few things like video competitions, people uploading their own videos and things like that, and unless they're in a unless there's an incredibly great prize, like, for example, your video appearing on the mainstream TV channel, then it's really, really hard to get lots of people to do this. The barrier to entry is just still, even with video being made very simple online, is still much, much too high for lots of people. Text is much better. You know, getting people to text comments, getting people to start a conversation really needs to be the entry point. And then a tiny minority of people who become part of your participatory community will actually really, really engage and make really good content. But most people will just want to chat. Very few people will actually want to be creative. I went to art school, and I kind of assume that everyone wants to be really creative, and it just isn't true. Lots of people just want to chat. So focus engagement and participation at the chat level rather than the creation level. Reward people constantly. When people are starting to engage in the project, get them, you know, make them part of the story, make them, reward them. I mean, this is the kind of thing that we can learn from teachers brilliantly. Really good teachers massively overpraise and reward students, because that's incredibly motivating, and it's just as true online as it is in the classroom. Including the audience activity. Actually, this is really funny. This is the first time I've done this presentation to a more formal education group, and I'm realizing like it's teaching you all to suck eggs, because these are essentially all the things that teachers do really well. But including the audience activity in the story is another part of it. Getting people who are contributing and making them part of the main narrative, you know, making them feel like they're part of the story rather than just a passive contributor is part of that. And then finally, again, just making games. I'm very, very interested in how games can not only create a very compelling experience, but actually deliver learning. We did a game earlier on this year based around a primetime show called City of Ice, which was about the creation of the police force in 17th century London. And we built a very, very compelling, beautifully rich, industry, you know, it's won awards already, kind of really high quality flash game online. But we got the same historical consultant, and all the storylines were based around the world of Georgian London and the reason why the police force was first needed. And it was just phenomenal looking at gaming forums, how the conversations that players were having about, you know, problems they were having in the game were based around all these historical stuff. So I mean, in a way, it's not just about, you know, serious games, as it's so called, but I think games generally, we're working on games next year that are to do with things like happiness and kind of like cognitive hacks and, you know, how you kind of present yourself, and we're basing games around things like social interaction within kind of communities. So we're building this game that's basically the way you play the game is to learn how to kind of manage your relationships with different people in this particular situation to get through. So it's not just about action games or about history games, but nowadays you can make games that can deliver very, very sophisticated and quite subtle social learning as well as more formal educational learning. So, as I said, I don't actually think there's anything I can deliver or give you as being an expert, but what I'm hoping I've managed to do is just give you some examples of the experiment that we're doing at Channel 4. As I said, it's not focused really at education, although we have done some work with Future Lab on how teachers might use these resources in schools. And there's a lot of interest, particularly with Year Dot and Battlefront, on PSHE and citizenship agendas. There's some really great content there that they think they might be able to use. But really the problem we're trying to tackle is in an audience where, you know, the one shortage now, the one kind of the one shortage is not content, but attention. How on earth do you cut through? How on earth do you actually keep attention? And then how do you turn it into value? And that's what we're starting to find out. Thank you very much.